Hey everyone, James Irwin here with a video. I play as AutoCat01 on both PokerStars and Full Tilt Poker. This shorter video is going to be addressing a subject with a fairly wide paintbrush here, and it's going to be on flatting from the big blind specifically, which is one of the larger leaks that I found in my own game. So this is as much for self-analysis as anything, but I want to dive right into it, keep the introduction short as always, and I know I have a lot on the screen right here, so I want to break down exactly what these 3 or 4 things are to start off with. The first is going to be the hand itself in question, which is a hand from a mini FPOP's main event we final tabled earlier this year. And the hand is facing an aggressive regular who has been playing, in my opinion, quite well. We've played a few pots together already to this point. He's opening from under the gun +2. He's opening into 5 players, and I'm in the big blind here sitting about 55 big blinds, 56 big blinds effective versus Axer's min raise here. On the right, bottom right of the screen here, we have a program called Poker Snowy using their Preflop advisor, and this is going to be a big blind flatting range versus an under the gun 3x at a theoretical equilibrium. And what Poker Snowy does is tries to teach a baseline GTO play, and I think they have a good representation of that play, or at least certainly gives you some baseline of where you can be at in your own play. But this bottom right here is a 169 matrix of all the hands. All the hands that we're going to be flatting versus an under the gun raise at 6 max cash versus a 3x. This middle one is going to be versus a 2.5x raise. And the point of pulling these both up on the screen together is to give you an idea of how much your range changes based on the raise size. This one here is going to be where I think we're going to get at, approximately where I need to be flatting in this hand. I'm going to leave it hidden for just a moment and circle back to it. So just a couple key considerations on this hand. We're fairly late in the tournament. We're facing a competent regular who's opening, and there is going to be some additional ICM pressure on us for sure. But when we really start to look at these hands and think about how we want to approach tournament play, I think there's a tendency to get caught up in trying to play the whole tournament a lot of times in your mind, and you really, at one time, and you really have to break things down street by street, decision by decision as much as possible. And as we'll see here in this hand facing his minimum raise needing 18% pot odds, I do go ahead and make a quite large mistake here and fold my hand. And this is something really that I've just become more aware and conscious of very, very recently. I've kind of been enlightened, honestly, of how much we need to be flatting from the big blind. And I think this is going to be a good spot to illustrate to some younger players and reiterate to myself and others how wide we need to be flatting here and why. Key considerations, again, we need 18% equity to flat here profitably if we were to play this hand in a vacuum. Now, Poker Snowy does make all decisions, from my understanding, in that way, just looking at the hand at hand. So I think it's a good program to use. We're going to pull up ProPokerTools.com here as well in just a moment and dive into that. But if you look at how wide we need to be flatting in a cash game, and now keep in mind this is 100 big blinds effective versus a 3x raise, we would be flatting or 3-betting all of our suited aces, King 10 suited, all of our pairs, and then really just bigger hands. Now if we're to face a 2.5x raise from that same position, we have to be flatting tremendously wider. I don't have the exact percentages here, but you'll notice that we're adding a bunch of King X hands in. We're going to add 4, 5, 6 here maybe, offsuit hands down to the King Jack, Queen Jack, down to Ace 10, and then a bunch of small suited connectors that are going to play well against an early the gun or early position opening range, which under the gun and early position ranges are generally going to be comprised of larger hands. So we're not going to be dominated quite nearly as often with some of these smaller suited connectors. So it logically makes sense that they're added in. But the key thing that I want to point out here again is just how much our range changes versus different raise sizes. And the reason for it is really just how the math dictates how we need to play our hand if we're getting significantly different odds. And if we go look at a few spots here on Pro Poker Tools, which I'll pull up right now, you're going to see that I've gone ahead and pulled up 5 different scenarios. Our hand, the King 10 off, facing 5 different ranges, one of them being 40% range, 30% range, 20% range, 10% range, and 5% range. 40% range is going to be fairly wide. A 5% range is going to be extremely strong, like 9s plus-ish, ace-queen type range, so very, very strong. And working it backwards, I want to give you some idea of the approximate equity we're going to have. And we can't be exactly sure what Axer, the opener in this hand, has as far as the range, but we can, based on experience and based on some range work with these tools, we can start to get some idea of what he might have. And if we assume that he has a 40% range, which I do believe is going to be wider than he does have, we would have 48.66% equity. And again, we would need 18% equity. Against the 30% range, we would have 45.46%. Against a 20% range, 40.42%. And I think these 2 ranges are going to be most representative of this exact spot, the 20 and 30% opening ranges for this hand. And we're looking at 40 to 45% equity. But just as an example, let's look at a 10% range as well. We would have 33.37% equity. And against an exceptionally strong range of 5% here, which he has significantly wider than, of course, we would have 28.24% equity. Now, I understand this is a tournament environment, and we can't necessarily look at things from a pure equity, a raw equity standpoint. But I think it's good, and I think Poker Snowy as well is good, to just give you a baseline understanding of some of the decisions we need to be making and how the math and just raw equities will influence those decisions. Now, key considerations that might increase the needed equity that we would have are that we're out of position, so we're not going to necessarily realize that equity. But that's a quantifiable thing as well, and some work has to go into that. I won't dive into it, how you might come up with some type of a formula to discount and say if you're going to lose 10% or 5% equity based on the playability of the hand, or that you're going to need a few more percent based on some ICM considerations, or the fact that it is a competent reg. There are going to be negative things that are going to reduce our flatting range for sure, but I think that there's going to be a few positive things as well that could potentially increase our flatting range. And one of the most important is just how tournament regs approach play, and how they, I guess, where their strengths and weaknesses lie as players. And I'm certainly an example of this. Tournament regs aren't going to be barreling turns and rivers nearly as much as a competent cash game player with more well-constructed ranges. So you're not going to face a lot of pressure on later streets. And it's very important that when you make these pre-flop decisions, to make them correctly and then go from there and kind of stay at or near equilibrium from that point out, or be able to make exploitive plays off of a fundamentally sound baseline. Another consideration here is going to be that you're going to be facing smaller bet sizes. So when you pull up Poker Snowy and Hold'em Resources and other calculators, those are going to be based on the fact that people are going to have well-constructed ranges, that they're going to be using correct bet sizes. But I don't think you're going to see that from tournament players in general nearly as much as you would see from folks from the cash game world. So Just a real quick rundown here. Again, some of the equities we're going to have: 28 to, I believe, 48% equity, which all qualify well beyond the 18% necessary here. What that means to us as tournament players, and the most important takeaway from this video, is to really take a look at how the raise size can influence your flatting range. And this quick example here of just simply changing from a 3x raise to a 2.5x raise has greatly expanded our range. Now, if we're to reduce this further down to a 2x raise and then add in an ante, which is nearly the size of another blind here, and if this was a full table, I believe it would actually be larger than the size of a big blind, we're going to end up with something similar to this in my eyes for a flatting range, and it does seem quite wide. And it seems quite wide to me as someone who's just really getting on board with how much we need to be flatting from the blinds here. But this is Poker Snowy's representation of a big blind flatting range versus a button 2.5x. And when you factor in all the considerations of a reduced raise size, the fact that regs aren't going to be barreling as well and have as intelligently constructed ranges as potential cash game counterparts, and then the fact that we're adding antes into play, I think you can come up with something about like this, which is going to be 3-betting all of your suited aces, 3-betting king-9 suited down queen-9 suited and better, or king-9 suited and up, my apologies, queen-9 suited and up, actually flatting king-queen off on a mixed strategy, which I won't get into here. These numbers are mixed strategies that Poker Snowy's recommending for us. I believe that in a lot of spots you might be even flatting some more of king X and queen X offsuit. And just to give you, in this particular spot, to give you an idea here, the green is going to be 3-bets, the orangish color is going to be flats, and the white is going to be folds. So I believe we're going to end up with a quite wide flatting range here. I haven't gone through run exact numbers, and I'm not certain if I'm the guy to do it, to be completely honest. I think there's a lot more qualified people for this exact spot. But as I'm learning myself, and as I can hopefully teach some of the younger players, just to kind of put in your head some idea of how to think about these things, how effective different raise sizes, different bet sizes on later streets are going to make these things. And just wanted to run through a really quick video here, show just how wide you're going to need to be flatting and why, and how you can apply that to your own tournament game, and then tweak it to individual spots. For instance, if you're at a final table and you need to reduce your range or increase your necessary equity a lot more, you can certainly go ahead and make those adjustments. But when I think about poker, I always want to stay within a certain framework and then kind of exploit from there, which is a little different than a lot of players who are extremely exploitive at a lot of times. And some of those players are doing so correctly, some of those players are doing so very incorrectly, and it really comes down to experience in a lot of spots. And if you're one of those true wizards who can exploit people all day and you have a decent fundamental understanding of poker or years of experience, this video is probably not going to be for you, and most of my videos aren't going to be for you realistically. But if you're a younger player who's trying to get some idea of why things change and how they change, I think this is just a simple representation of how to think about things from a flatting perspective here, making sure we're not making some of these bigger mistakes. As tournament players, we fight for every small edge we can, especially when you get to those shorter stacks and you're really just searching for any plus EV spot. But we need to be making sure we're taking a lot of these very clear, 15, 20, 25% or more type equity advantages that we're going to have. And it's such a frequent thing that you're going to see that is kind of often overlooked. And when you're mass tabling, you have 10, 15, 20 plus tables up, and you're constantly missing these spots, they're going to start to cut into your EV and your ROI as a player. So it's just a very important concept. It's a very recurring theme. We're running towards the 15-minute video mark here, and as usual, want to keep these as short and sweet as possible, keep the conclusions short as well. So appreciate your time with me today. Again, it's James Irwin, AutoCAD 01. Cheers.